Matilda by Roald Dahl. In a small English village lived an extraordinary girl named Matilda Wormwood. From a very young age, it was clear she was special. By 1.5, her speech was perfect, and by 3, she had taught herself to read from newspapers and magazines left around the house. Her mind was nimble and brilliant, but her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, were gormless and cruel people who saw their daughter as little more than a scab to be flicked away. They had a son, Michael, who was perfectly ordinary and whom they doted on, but they showed nothing but disdain for Matilda and her love of books, preferring she watch television instead. At the age of 4, starved for proper literature, Matilda began walking to the public library every afternoon while her mother played bingo. There she met the kind librarian, Mrs. Phelps, who was astonished to find such a tiny, dark-haired child devouring classic literature meant for adults. Under Mrs. Phelps's quiet and compassionate guidance, Matilda's bedroom became her sanctuary, where she traveled the world through the pages of Dickens, Hemingway, and Kipling, her mind expanding far beyond the narrow confines of her family's shallow existence. Matilda's father was a small, ratty-looking man with a thin mustache who prided himself on being a crooked second-hand car dealer. He boasted to his son about his dishonest tricks, like filling gearboxes with sawdust to quiet their rattling, and using a high-speed electric drill to illegally roll back the mileage on the cars he sold. When Matilda called him out on his cheating, he flew into a rage, calling her an ignorant little squirt. Her mother, a large woman with poorly dyed platinum blonde hair and a bulging figure, was equally dismissive, caring only for her bingo games and television soap operas. That night, after being belittled for her intelligence, 5-year-old Matilda decided that whenever her parents were beastly, she would get her own back. Her first target was her father. The next morning, she snuck his precious pork pie hat from its peg and squeezed a thin line of superglue around the inside rim. Mr. Wormwood put the hat on without noticing a thing, but upon arriving at his garage, he found he could not take it off. He spent the entire day in the hat, and when he returned home, his wife's attempt to yank it off only resulted in a scream of pain. That night, he was forced to sleep in the hat, and the next morning, Mrs. Wormwood had to cut it off his head, leaving him with a bald white ring around his hair and patches of leathery glue stuck to his forehead. For a week, there was peace, but it didn't last. One evening, infuriated by Matilda's quiet enjoyment of a library book, Mr. Wormwood snatched it from her hands, called it filth, and ripped the pages out in handfuls. Matilda, though horrified, did not cry. Instead, her brilliant mind devised a new plan. The next day, she borrowed a talking parrot from her friend Fred and cleverly wedged its cage up the dining room chimney. That evening, as the family ate their TV dinners, a spooky voice echoed from the dining room, calling out, "Hello, hello, hello." The Wormwoods, convinced they had burglars, armed themselves with a poker and a golf club and crept into the room, only to find it empty. Then the voice whispered, "Rattle my bones," sending the terrified family fleeing from what they now believed was a ghost. The next afternoon, a sooty Matilda secretly returned the parrot to its owner. Another evening, Mr. Wormwood decided to show off his business acumen by having his son Michael calculate his profits for the day. As Michael struggled with the complex sums, Matilda, from across the room, quietly announced the exact total. Enraged that she could be so clever, her father accused her of cheating and looking at his paper, screaming that she was a liar. This injustice demanded a new punishment. The next morning, Matilda snuck into the bathroom and poured most of her mother's platinum blonde hair dye into Mr. Wormwood's bottle of oil of violets hair tonic. At breakfast, Mr. Wormwood strode in, his proud black hair now a ghastly, dirty silver. His wife shrieked, dropping a plate of food, and he stared in horror at his reflection in her compact mirror, utterly humiliated. At 5.5, Matilda finally started school at Crunchem Hall Primary School. The establishment was ruled by Miss Trunchbull, a tyrannical and formidable former Olympic athlete who loathed small children. Matilda was placed in the bottom class with a teacher named Miss Honey. She was a slim, fragile young woman with a lovely, pale face and a mild, quiet demeanor that the children instantly adored. During the first lesson, Miss Honey quickly discovered Matilda's genius. The little girl could effortlessly solve complex multiplication problems in her head and read with perfect fluency. When asked, she recited a charming limerick she had composed on the spot about Miss Honey's loveliness, causing the usually solemn teacher to blush and smile with pure pleasure. Astounded, Miss Honey went straight to the headmistress's study to report this brilliant child. But Miss Trunchbull, a gigantic and terrifying woman who looked more like a stag hunter in her belted smock and green breeches, refused to listen. She called Matilda's father a pillar of society and declared that he had warned her his daughter was a real wart. She dismissed Matilda's abilities as trickery and refused to move her to a higher class. That evening, a determined Miss Honey visited the Wormwoods, only to find them slumped in front of the television, utterly uninterested in her daughter's brilliance. Mrs. Wormwood declared that looks is more important than books, and Mr. Wormwood scoffed at the idea of university. Miss Honey left, feeling defeated but not beaten.
At school, Matilda befriended a gutsy girl named Lavender. They learned about the headmistress's terrifying punishments from an older girl, Hortensia, who described being locked in the Chokey, a narrow cupboard lined with broken glass and nails. They soon witnessed the Trunchbull's cruelty firsthand. In the playground, she grabbed a girl named Amanda Thrip by her pigtails, swung her around like an Olympic hammer, and hurled her clear across the playground fence. A few days later, the entire school was assembled to watch the punishment of Bruce Bogtrotter, a large boy accused of stealing a slice of the headmistress's private chocolate cake. As punishment, the Trunchbull forced him to eat an entire, massive 18-inch cake. To everyone's astonishment, Bruce heroically consumed the whole thing. The children cheered, but the enraged Trunchbull responded by smashing the empty china platter over his head. The following week, it was Miss Honey's class's turn for their weekly lesson with the headmistress. Lavender, tasked with putting a jug of water on the teacher's desk, secretly slipped a slimy newt she'd caught into the jug. During the lesson, the Trunchbull terrorized the children, grabbing one boy by his hair and another by his ears. When she finally poured herself a glass of water, the newt flopped out with a plop. The Trunchbull shrieked and immediately accused Matilda of the prank. Matilda, incandescent with rage at the unfair accusation, stared at the glass on the desk. A strange hot power began to build behind her eyes. She felt millions of tiny, invisible arms shooting out from them, and as she focused all her energy on the glass, it slowly, impossibly, tipped over, spilling its contents all over the headmistress's chest. The class erupted, claiming Matilda hadn't moved, and the bewildered and furious Trunchbull stormed out. After class, Matilda confessed to Miss Honey that she had tipped the glass over with her eyes. To test this, Miss Honey placed the empty glass on the table, and Matilda, concentrating fiercely, made it topple over once more. Awestruck, Miss Honey invited the child back to her home for tea. They walked to a tiny, derelict farm laborer's cottage, barely more than a shack with no furniture besides wooden boxes, no running water, and no kitchen. Matilda was appalled. Here, Miss Honey tearfully shared her story. She was the niece of Miss Trunchbull. Her father, a doctor named Magnus, had died mysteriously when she was 5, leaving her in the cruel care of her aunt, Agatha Trunchbull, who treated her like a slave. Miss Trunchbull had taken the family's beautiful home and all the money, forcing Miss Honey to live in abject poverty on a pittance of £1 a week. Matilda, her mind racing, devised a plan. For the next week, she locked herself in her room and practiced her power, learning to lift and move a cigar with her mind. The following Thursday, during the Trunchbull's lesson, Matilda was ready. As the headmistress began to torment another student, Matilda focused all her energy on the piece of chalk by the blackboard. The chalk lifted into the air, and in a childlike scrawl began to write a message as if from the ghost of Magnus Honey. It read, "Agatha, this is Magnus. It is Magnus, and you'd better believe it. Agatha, give my Jenny back her house. Give my Jenny back her wages. Give my Jenny the house. Then get out of here. If you don't, I will come and get you. I will get you like you got me. I am watching you, Agatha." Upon reading the message, Miss Trunchbull let out a strangled gasp, fainted, and fell to the floor. Miss Trunchbull was never seen again. She vanished from the town, leaving the beautiful red brick house behind. Her father's will was mysteriously found, and Miss Honey was able to move back into her childhood home. Mr. Trilby became the new headmaster, and Matilda was moved to the top class where her brilliant mind was finally challenged. With her brain now fully occupied with advanced schoolwork, she found that her telekinetic powers had disappeared, much to her relief. A few weeks later, Matilda came home from a lovely afternoon tea at Miss Honey's house to find her parents frantically packing. Her father, a receiver of stolen cars, was fleeing the country to escape the police. They were moving to Spain forever. Horrified at the thought of leaving Miss Honey and her new life, Matilda ran back to her teacher's house and begged to be allowed to stay. The two of them raced back just as the Wormwoods were loading their car. Preoccupied and uncaring, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood readily agreed to let their daughter stay. They sped off without a backward glance. Miss Honey hugged the small girl tightly, and in the warm evening air, standing in front of the house that was now their home, the two of them watched the car disappear, ready to start their new life together.